Silence gathers like pale dust upon the ormolu clock as a late winter twilight settles over the drawing room, muting the gilt and damask into half-remembered gold. Near the hearth, a cluster of ladies in watered silk stand sentinel around the tea trolley, speaking in measured murmurs while a distant quadrille breathes through a half-open door. At the fringe of that gentle hush, a young woman allows her gloved fingers to loosen around the mother-of-pearl sticks of a cream-coloured fan. For the briefest heartbeat she raises it, not to cool her cheek, but to veil a steadfast, forbidden look toward a figure framed by the tall French doors. The man, his lapels dark against the dim garden beyond, answers the glance with no more movement than the softening of his gaze. Yet across the polished parquet a story has already unfurled. No chaperone detects the quiet collision, for the fan falls at once to a resting angle, its painted blossoms appearing only to chase away an excess of heat. In truth, every motion is a syllable in eloquence still absent from encyclopedias. The curtained world of late-century decorum considers covert speech a necessity, and so the ivory ribs, the rustle of silk leaves, the minute tempo of opening and closing provide the lovers with a vocabulary so intricate that even moonlight might blush to translate it. What passes between the pair, as cinders hiss in the grate and the quadrille turns upon itself, is not mere impulse but a composition rehearsed beneath strict rules, polished with patience, and performed in public spaces that demand modesty while nourishing desire. Threads of such hushed histories are gathered by this quiet channel, where forgotten customs drift out from old journals and breathe again within the listener's private dusk. A gentle welcome hangs in the air. The unseen storytellers invite brief notes in the comment garden, below simple lines revealing the coasts, valleys, or lantern-lit streets from which each evening breeze arrives. The map that forms, delicate and unhurried, mirrors the unfurling lattice of a Victorian fan, many origins meeting at a single pivot, opening slowly in a shared appreciation of nuance. Before exploring the layered code itself, the mind may linger upon the era that shaped it. Victorian society praised restraint with one hand, while harbouring fervent sentiments with the other, and thus required instruments able to speak boldly, without audible sound. Fans met the challenge with serene assurance. They floated through ballrooms as ornaments of fashion, yet behind the diaphanous feathers or satin panels lay both agency and subtle defiance. A lady, formally bound by expectations of silence, could by one discreet flourish redirect a suitor, refuse an advance, or kindle an alliance more daring than politeness would ever suspect. Neither letter nor whispered word travelled so swiftly, and none left so small a trace. Consider the formality of a drawing-room after dinner, conversation confined to rain, roses, or the latest watercolours. Chaperons posted like carved angels upon the mantel, reputations fragile as spun sugar. Within this brittle arrangement the fan unfolded opportunities. Held closed against the heart, it murmured, "Do not doubt my affection." Drawn slowly across the brow, it confessed weariness or cool disapproval. Allowed to drop from the fingertips, it pleaded, "We must part, vigilance approaches." Every motion, hinge and breath of silk carried meaning because the era itself was practiced in reading small signs so practiced, indeed, that entire cue books circulated among polite circles, cataloguing appropriate gestures the way botanists pressed roses between vellum sheets. Scholars today debate the extent to which those manuals were earnest or fanciful, yet the fascination they inspired remains unquestioned. A century smitten with steam, telegraph wires, and chemistry nonetheless prized the ancient art of illusion. The fan became both instrument and stage. Its painted surface told one story in stillness, a shepherdess beneath a willow, perhaps while the choreography above a glimmering bracelet told another, more urgent tale. Messages hid inside the negative space between ribs, like moth wings in folded sleep, visible only when motion set them free. A swift half-circle, no wider than a sigh, signified admonishment. A full opening followed by immediate closure urged full attention. Touching the tip of the thumb to the third stave spoke of sweet anticipation. Hiding the eyes behind the leaves declared playful refusal, whereas letting the guard sticks rest upon the lips pledged secrecy. Tempo altered semantics with subtle precision. A languid sweep conveyed melancholy longing, yet the same shape executed with brisk vivacity whispered excitement close to recklessness. It was, in essence, a silent sonnet recited in plain sight. The verse is more potent for being composed of air. Why did such subtlety matter? Reputation held the power of livelihood, inheritance, and social survival. A single imprudent word could echo through parlour gossip for seasons. Thus lovers bent toward codes that could vanish as quickly as they appeared. The fan, easily mistaken for ornament, allowed confession without record. Even within arranged marriages, the object served as companion to self-expression, gifting its bearer a private stage amid the throng. In this series, each chapter will linger upon a distinct facet of that phenomenon: the woods that lent their perfume to polished sticks, the Spanish dyes that bled twilight onto crepe, the craftsman of Saint Honore who could carve a dragonfly so fine its wings stirred at the pulse of a how wrist, the clandestine courts where royalty orchestrated entire affairs with spangled guards, and at last the slow eclipse of it all, beneath electric light and modern sleeves. After tonight's introductory drift through the drawing room, the journey will glide toward shaping hands and seasoned artisans. Chapter 2 will rest among wood shavings and varnish, listening to sandalwood cure beneath lamplight. Later evenings will wander through etiquette primers, trace the silhouettes of celebrated fan-bearers, pause at moonlit railway platforms where partings were shaded by perfumed leaves, and finally arrive at the twilight of the custom, when motorcars hummed at curbs and love letters adopted a swifter carriage. Along the way, quiet revelations shall surface: pigments that concealed lockets of hair, rivets that served as tiny flakons of violet water, even revolutions planned within what seemed mere arabesques of chrysanthemum and cloud. Each unfolding will be gentle, preferring contemplation to intrigue, yet assurance is given that by the closing chapter the entire silent vocabulary will lie softly illuminated, ready to drift into dreaming minds. No hurried unravelling shall disturb the hush. Rather, understanding will bloom the way dusk becomes true night, scarcely perceived until the stars are suddenly everywhere. Within the cooling coals of the present scene, where the young woman at last turns away, letting her fan trail like a white kite string against her gown, the first secret rests unseen, the faint scent of orris root rising from the carved sandalwood spine, marking the handiwork of a famed maker in St. James's Pie. It is to that workshop, the domain of quiet chisels and pearl dust, that the narrative floats next, content to leave the forbidden glance glimmering like a mote within the mirror's glow. The drawing room dims, the chords of the quadrille resolve into a single thread of harmony, and conversation sevels into soft spirals of steam above china cups. What remains is the subtlest flutter, a concord between desire and decorum born upon a well-loved fan. In that flutter lies the promise of many nights to come, each one an opening leaf, in the ever-expanding pattern of the past. The hush of the lantern-lit garden from the previous tale still trembles, like a final petal balanced on twilight air, and its quiet fragrance carries softly into the next reverie. A drifting chronicle of folded paper, carved sandalwood, and silk that once travelled farther than any bird migrating between hemispheres. In the silence that lingers after a distant lute's last note, a fan appears, half opened, half dreaming, calling to mind dawn breezes that once wandered through bamboo groves on the rim of the east. Long before such an object brushed against British satin gloves, artisans in China shaped thin slats of fragrant wood into delicate arcs, joining them at a single pivot so they could unfurl like a peony greeting warm spring rain. Painters then breathed landscapes upon the pliant leaves, cloud-washed pavilions, mute scholars beneath plum blossoms, riverboats gliding toward mist. A closed fan, tucked within a scholar's sleeve, concealed the scene, yet with a subtle flick, mountains and water revealed themselves, as though memory itself had opened. Within that unhurried gesture lay the embryo of a language, a hint that silence could yet speak, that motion alone might serve as sigil and sentence. Across the South China Sea, merchants set sail from the bustling port of Canton, their holds perfumed by tea and warmed by porcelain, their decks adorned with crates of those very fans. Monsoon winds ushered them toward islands where the sun rose earlier still. In Edo period Japan, court ladies embraced the brise fan slat against slat, pierced and lacquered like moonlight filtered through pine needles. There, behind the low melodic thrum of koto strings, movements became more codified. A half-turn masqueraded as demure refusal, a lifted guard signaled controlled laughter, and a veiled gaze, peeking over lacquered ribs, carried both inquiry and invitation. The language was not written down. It belonged to wrists and eyes, to shared understandings cultivated in the hush of sliding doors. Galleons and caravels later bore these artifacts toward the crimson sunsets of the Spanish kingdoms, where the Moorish love of pattern and arc adored them instantly. In Seville's courtyards, fountains mirrored the play of fan against candlelight, while castanets kept time for dancers whose fluttering tools were no longer mere coolers of air, but glamorous accents to the very rhythm of flirtation. The Spanish hand, swift and sensuous, embroidered fans with gold thread, pressed mother of pearl into guards, and discovered that a sudden snap close could punctuate a teasing glance the way a minor chord punctuates a flamenco sigh. Here whispered codes, matured, covering the face, spoke of mystery, tiptoeing the fan across lips, begged secrecy, dropping it to the tiled floor signaled a shared rendezvous. Though the gestures were flamboyant, intention remained veiled, safe within ornate workmanship. By the early 18th century, European travellers returning from Iberian courts carried more than new guitar tablatures. They carried rumours of these silent conversations. Fashionable salons in Paris soon sparkled with imported Spanish abanicos, and with them, the promise of wordless repartee long after a prim governess declared verbal discourse improper. French craftsmen inspired, sought to surpass their distant cousins. Workshops along the Seine married Asian mechanisms with Rococo tastes, pastel cherubs atop gilded latticework, medallions of mythic love stories, reed thin guards of ivory carved into nets of vines. The conversation between continents became, itself, an unspoken dance. East offered elegant skeletons of function. Europe replied with opulent flesh of ornament. England, still in the golden wake of its restoration, preferred restraint but could not resist the gradual persuasion of fashion's tide. Gentle women in Bath promenaded with discreet imports, noting the refreshing breeze such novelties provided during assemblies heated by orchestral strings and hothouse blooms. Tea rooms buzzed not with gossip alone. Observers traced the curvature of a lady's pale wrist to divine meaning. Was her fan resting closed upon the left cheek, a shield against unwanted approach? Did it hover open, angled toward a particular waistcoated cavalier? The uninitiated imagined mere fidgeting. Initiates recognized eloquence more precise than spoken verse. Occasional scholars attempted to catalogue the cues, yet the charm lay precisely in their fluidity, in the way regional inflection shaped each sweep. A Neapolitan flick differed from a Dutch tremble, just as a lilac's fragrance differs from a rose's. Though both remain fragrances of May, the fan's vocabulary persisted as folklore, drifting lightly through courts and theatres, cunning enough to escape censors, gentle enough to seem harmless. Then came the deep rumble of change, iron forged in the heart of England, steam rising from city skylines, gears humming like metallic bees. The Industrial Revolution opened new passageways for what had once been rare. Birmingham's manufactories acquired saw-toothed machines capable of slicing bone and wood into uniform splints, while printers in Manchester rolled out endless ribbons of lithograph paper, each sheet awaiting gold highlights and pressed roses. What once required weeks of artisan concentration could now be multiplied within hours. Window displays in burgeoning department stores showcased rows upon rows of fans, some paper simple, others silk lavish each, affordable to layers of society that earlier could claim neither lacquer nor lace. Yet this mechanical boom, rather than destroying mystique, only broadened the silent colloquy's reach. Milliners' apprentices, governesses with modest stipends, widows earning pensions and debutantes of grand estates might all possess a personal fan. Evening streets of Brighton and Edinburgh now carried flutter and hush from carriage to concert hall. The shared code expanded like an ever-growing lexicon. Each new pair of hands might add nuance to the motion, as though the era's restless energy sought repose in the subtlest of gestures. Amid this newfound abundance, one figure shimmered above the throng, her presence as formative as the machinery itself, Queen Victoria. In portraits painted during her early reign, she holds a fan edged with mother of pearl that seems to echo both Spanish sparkle and Asian grace. It frames her youthful face like a pale crescent moon. Courtiers noted her quiet habit of pausing before conversation, spreading the leaf wide, and then letting it drift slowly closed, as if catching private reflection upon each rib. When sovereign preference aligns with public fancy, fashion seldom hesitates. Immediately, court suppliers receive commissions for fans suited to state receptions, christenings, garden parties, and even funerary rites. Gentle readers of illustrated magazines learned the sovereign's favoured patterns: Parian lilies, Scottish thistles intertwined with subtle emblems of empire. Across the kingdom, society observed and emulated. Mothers gifting trousseaux considered a fan essential as any cameo, and ball invitations printed small marginalia reminding guests that fans were de rigueur for proper ventilation of both air and conversation. The object evolved further. Mechanized mother-of-pearl inlay machines enabled shimmering mosaics across guards, while new chemical dyes birthed hues of mauve and ultramarine previously unseen. The fan became not only communicative, but commemorative, a miniature canvas memorializing jubilees, royal births, and far-flung battles. With popularity swelling, the once informal code grew unsettled. For where many hearts meet in silence, eventually some voice will seek order. Etiquette writers, sensing both opportunity and responsibility, set ink to cream-colored paper. Mancals appeared on mahogany bookshop shelves, the lady's perfect guide to fan deportment, or the language of the fan plainly set forth for polite circles. Within, neat copperplate letters arranged themselves beside small engravings, showing the approved motions, touching the tip to right temple do not betray affection, flicking the edge against the chin implore attentiveness. What had lived as breath became diagram, the hush of invention calcified into printed rule, yet even printed rules could not wholly confine that which was born of breeze and whim. Fans remained, after all, weightless conspirators, answerable only to the pulse within each wrist. A page might prescribe that dropping a fan signified anger. The heart might instead let it fall in merry surrender. Still, parlors across Britain and beyond now kept such books propped beside gilt mirrors, and young ladies studied the diagrams as they might copy minuets, practicing before firelight the precise half-twist or modest incline. The fan's voice, though ancient and unspoken, had entered the stately archive of Western decorum. Beneath this veneer of regulation, artisans continued to whisper their own narratives into the folds. In a modest workshop along the River Liffey, a widowed craftswoman painted minute, swallows returning each spring, symbolizing faithful reunion. In Marseille, a retired sailor etched seahorses onto pearwood guards, honoring trade routes that once ferried silk leaves home. These personal tales breathed into commodity, nestled against the cheek of each user, assuring that mechanical progress had not chased away soul. Thus did a simple instrument of breeze travel from eastern verandas to English parlors, from silent scholars to sovereign trendsetters, gathering within its ribs the murmurings of centuries. It stood at the intersection of distant winds and roaring engines, of private desire and public decree. Even folded shut, it housed layered histories, the scent of sandalwood forests, the clack of castanets under Andalusian stars, the hiss of steam inside iron foundries, the sigh of a young queen contemplating empire. Night sits more softly now, as though warmed by countless half-moons of ivory and silk drifting through time. Somewhere within the hush, a last echo of a machine hammer fades and joins the delicate crescendo of concerttree strings, tuning in a fashionable hall. Fans ascend, open and recline. Like small birds settling onto roosts for twilight rest, the language, whether printed or improvised, waits patiently within each flutter. Farther along the quiet corridor of this chronicle lies another door, slightly ajar, where gaslight will soon glow upon ballroom floors, and lovers will test those very codes beneath chandeliers. For now, the handle remains untouched, while the faint rustle of folding leaves comforts the air, promising that the next scene will unfold as gently as a fan's first breath of evening. From the quiet shimmer that lingered upon the mother-of-pearl rivet in the final scene of the preceding chapter, the tale drifts onward like a meted sigh, settling now upon the movements themselves, those measured ripples of air that once spoke more eloquently than any raised voice could dare. The ballroom has not vanished. Its chandeliers still swing softly in the mind's periphery, yet the dancers recede, leaving only a single fan poised between gloved fingers. What follows is less a lesson than a moonlit reverie on motion, on the secret syllables traced in the hush between waltzes, where every tilt, every tremor, carried weighty intent pleated beneath polite silence. The first canonical gesture drapes itself in unhurried dignity, the slow wave. Wrist relaxed, ribs of ivory unrolling in measured arcs, it is akin to a tide that knows the shoreline by heart and returns without haste, bringing with it an unspoken promise of composure. Within parlor parlance, such a wave suggested tranquil consent, the kind granted after careful reflection, the kind that asked nothing louder than a nod. Mothers observed the curve with satisfied eyes. Suitors felt their pulses steady. In printed treatises phonologia, the code of the folding leaf, and lesser pamphlets stitched in cheap twine, the slow wave appeared etched beside phrases like "I listen" or "I yield," yet the true potency lived only in the living wrist. Far swifter, though no less graceful, was the rapid flutter, a sudden bloom of motion that sent glints of candlelight darting between lacquered sticks. The manuals insisted it spoke of curiosity, a query released into the air, fragile and fleeting, awaiting reply. Yet rumor embroidered additional layers, Some whispered that the flutter, when paired with eyes lowered, warned of danger skulking near. Others claimed it summoned playful intrigue, a beckoning swirl toward shadowed verandas. The multiplicity of meaning rendered each flutter a small gamble. One woman's question might become another's covert alarm. Thus an adept kept her tempo precise, 3 brisk pulses, then stillness, like a bird alighting, only long enough to taste a crumb before vanishing. What remained between slow serenity and swift excitement was the half-open repose, neither entirely revealed nor coyly closed. The fan held at 30 degrees created a quiet alcove beside the cheek, a territory of pause. Scholars of subtext read this position as a threshold, an announcement of undecided inclination. In an era that prized certainty, uncertainty could be delicious. A gentleman observing a half-open fan knew he was invited to approach, yet urged to exercise patience. The air behind the guardstick moved scarcely at all, and in that sliver of stillness 1,000 futures balanced like dew. No codex captured it fully. It was living ellipsis. Printed guides multiplied as the century progressed, each declaring itself the definitive oracle. Some bore ornate gilded covers and the impressive endorsement of duchesses. Others emerged from modest news stalls, their pages smelling faintly of lampblack. The credibility of these compilations wavered like candle flame in a draught. One volume assured its readers that snapping a fan shut signified "I despise you," while another insisted the gesture meant only "my mother calls." Satirical weeklies mocked the contradictions with playful cartoons, 2 ladies exchanging incomprehensible semaphore in such confusion that their suitors fled. Yet for every skeptic, 3 hopeful hearts clung to the possibility that meaning could be mastered if only one memorized the correct catechism of movements. Thus the lexicon settled into layers, like petals pressed between diary pages. Outwardly there were the tidy labels consent, curiosity, danger, each assigned to a respective motion. Beneath those formal layers, personal associations formed private dialects. A fan given by a brother, once returned from distant seas, might carry a memory of brine and farewell. Its slow wave, therefore, murmured of homecoming rather than surrender. Another, trimmed with violet ribbon worn at a funeral, could turn a rapid flutter into warning amplified by grief. To the observers, the gestures appeared uniform. To the bearer, they shimmered with singular nuance. This inward embroidery granted the practice its enduring allure, for no printed chart could fully translate the heart's handwriting. Publishers, eager to capitalize upon fascination, commissioned illustrators to capture performers in mid-gesture. Lithographs tinted with pastel watercolor showed a salon bathed in lamplight. The lines of each fan movement broken into numbered stages, as though ballet steps frozen upon paper. In one plate, a lady's sleeve billowed just enough to suggest subtle scent escaping from beneath. In another, her silhouette appeared against a balcony where evening primroses curled. Readers traced these figures with fingertips, feeling, through texture alone, the promise of secret mastery. Some plates folded outward, revealing panoramic tableaus of masquerade soirees, each attendee coded by posture and plume, encouraging the student to identify consent, curiosity, or danger hidden inside the painted throng. Beyond printed paper and polished plates, the art was carried into boarding school dormitories where twilight whispered through thin curtains. There, after embroidery hoops had been set aside and Latin declensions recited, girls gathered in informal conclave. They practiced with cardboard fans cut from boxes of biscuits, hands cramped yet determined. One would perform, the others would interpret, awarding quiet applause for accurate readings. Mnemonics blossomed, a nursery rhyme aligned with tempo, a half-remembered hymn, mapped onto the angle of tilt. Some tucked small quilting pins into their sleeves as tactile prompts, 1 prick for slow wave, 2 for flutter, 3 for half-open. Pause. In this way knowledge seeped into muscle memory, no longer mere information but embodied whisper. Summer holidays complicated the ritual. Rural cousins, unfamiliar with fan speech, would stare in bemusement as the visiting scholar executed impeccable signals during garden strolls. Lacking shared code, roses rustled without response, yet the young devotee persisted, trusting that practice, even unreceived, fortified the imperial line of gesture singing through her joints. She rehearsed before hallway mirrors, cherishing the hush of silk leaf, brushing her temple, the almost inaudible click of rivets settling. By the time autumn carriages returned her to schooling, She could perform the entire alphabet of motion blindfolded, recalling not the diagrams but the cadence, as one recalls lullabies learned before thought-possessed words. Decades later, that same adept now a matron whose mirrors reflected silver at her temples would open a keepsake box and find the worn cardboard practice fan resting beside dried lavender. The scent rose like memory's own exhalation, and she found herself performing, almost involuntarily, the slow wave, the half-open hush. No audience lingered. The gestures dissolved into lamplight, yet the room felt inhabited by every silent conversation she once navigated. The language, though barely uttered in the modern drawing room surrounding her, remained intact inside her fingertips, proof that movements learned in moonlit adolescence seldom forget the path back to mind. As the night within these pages lingers, the fan now lowers, its story pausing like breath held before dawn. Soon the attention will drift from signs to substances, to sandalwood, tortoiseshell, feather and silk, and the craftsmen whose patient hands coaxed all 4 seasons into foldable form. Their quiet workshops wait beyond the threshold, scents of varnish and verve mingling with birdsong. For now the air quivers with the last shimmer of decoded motion, each gesture settling upon the floorboards like soft confetti, promising that the unfolding of material wonders lies just ahead. The mind, after all, navigates memory through movement. Neurologists of the age, though they lacked the terminology of later science, spoke of muscular recollection, proposing that joints and sinews stored impressions akin to ink in a ledger. The fan language offered living evidence. One experiment recorded discreetly in the diary of a provincial doctor described a patient who, struck temporarily mute by fever, nonetheless communicated with perfect clarity through familiar flicks of her Spanish lace fan. Visitors decoded her wants with ease. Water, window opened, brother summoned. When speech returned, she confessed no awareness of having signaled at all. The wrist had remembered what the tongue forgot. Such anecdotes fanned, if quietly, the possibility that etiquette was not mere ornamentation, but a secondary circuitry linking impulse to expression, without passing through sound. In grand theatres where opera melodies floated among gilded tiers, the fan language achieved a heightened flourish. Boxes curtained with burgundy velvet framed rows of spectators who, half hidden from the stage, enacted dramas of their own. A single slow wave illuminated by gaslight might negotiate a post-performance carriage ride. A rapid flutter, timed to a soprano's vibrato, could telegraph excitement for an encore rather than for a companion. Observers in the pit, seeing only intermittent flashes, misinterpreted continuously, weaving myths that later circulated in cafes. Caricaturists captured the spectacle, gentlemen brandishing opera glasses like shields against volleys of signals they feared to misconstrue, while chaperones alert as owls monitored the spay semaphore with hawkish precision. The theatre thus became both audience and actor, its silence thick with invisible dialogue that rivaled the aria unfolding upon stage-boards. Long after the curtain fell, dust motes continued the conversation, drifting in lamplight, like pale, unpunctuated sentences into midnight air. The hush that settled after the last chapter's closing fan signal still shimmers in the dark, like a note that lingers in a cathedral nave long after the choir has stepped away. Out of that tender silence, the instrument of those secret gestures drifts forward for closer contemplation, a featherlight tableau of spokes and silences, stitched from fragrance, shimmer, and paint. Tonight the attention eases from language to substance, from flutter to fabric, observing how the very fibres of a Victorian fan carried messages long before any fingertip set them swaying. Most ancient among those fibres is sandalwood, an aromatic heartwood prized less for outward splendour than for the breath of distant forests. It releases with each unfurling. Craftsmen cut it in slender sticks, the grain so tight it almost appears silk-polished before a file ever touches it. When a parlour lamp warmed the folds, the wood's quiet perfume slipped between velvet drapes, tracing woodland memories through rooms heavy with coal smoke. Even in crowded ballrooms the scent trembled just enough to mark its bearer as someone who preferred refinement softened by nature. Sandalwood promised discretion, a fan that carried its own hush, never clanging jewellery nor clinking chains, simply breathing its identity through calm aroma. If sandalwood whispered, mother of pearl glimmered like moonlit water. Shell in layers from St. Malo to St. Quentin sliced the nacre in diaphanous veneers, then pressed them onto bone or tortoiseshell guards with fish glue so clear it vanished into translucence. Under candlelight each fragment caught sparks of rose and aqua and pellucid gold, painting the eye with shifting spectra that no pigment could pin down. A single outward tilt across a salon could send ripples of color through a crowd. And those ripples said what polished mahogany or plain calfskin could not, that the bearer possessed both money and a taste for the intangible. Each fragment, a sliver of oceanic origin, lent her an air of voyaging even while standing still. Far humbler in cost yet daring in artistry was papier-mâché, the alchemy of pulp and varnish perfected in the Midlands. Sheets of discarded ledgers, theatre bills, and family letters were macerated until words dissolved into pure fibre, then pressed into moulds, dried, and lacquered to a mirror's depth. On this black glassy ground, painters scattered lilies and larks in powders of cobalt, vermilion and gilt, the colours floating above a darkness so polished that any surrounding lamplight gathered in its depths like dusk on water. A papier-mâché fan did not pass for porcelain or pearl, it claimed beauty through transformation, proving that the ordinary scraps of paper, sweeps of soot cooled, by patience become night sky and blossom. These materials found shape in two landscapes of labour, the intimate ateliers of Paris and the expanding workshops of Birmingham. In Paris, narrow staircases led to lofts where families laid out sandalwood sticks beside silk threads inherited from older generations. Grandfathers hand-cut rivet holes by candle flame, their rhythm measured as softly as breathing. Mothers washed shells in bowls of vinegar and snow melt, then sang to steady young hands during inlay. The final fans carried the hush of attics and the smell of chestnut roofs warmed by afternoon sun, a quiet luxury that felt handmade, even when displayed beneath gilded mirrors on the Rue du La Paix. Across the channel, the air rang with different melodies. In Birmingham, factory windows rattled as steam presses stamped pulp guards by the hundred, yet even their artistry flickered amid the clangor. After the punch press released its metal jaws, women in smocked aprons guided paint-laden brushes through stenciled blossoms, synchronizing movements like murmured prayers. Each shift might yield boxes of matching fans for middle-class brides, yet a foreman still set aside the finest forms for small improvisations, an extra curl of vine, a hidden bee among roses, proof that industrial tempo could not fully drown the human wish to embellish. Pricing followed invisible ladders that every guest in a Victorian drawing room understood at a glance. A sandalwood fan with sparse carving cost scarcely more than a modest bonnet and marked its owner as respectable but frugal. Replace the plain rivet with a silver gilt eyelet, and the same fan leapt a rung, apt for a merchant's daughter introducing herself beyond familiar streets. Mother of pearl, however, belonged mainly to the tier where coachmen waited in livery outside theatre doors, at diamonds at hinge points, and the object soared beyond practicality into pure proclamation. A small banner declaring that the wearer could afford to fold moonlight in her palm and offer it to boredom. Papier-mâché, wide in range, slid across strata, a simple black lacquer fan sold for the price of an afternoon tea, while a hand-painted pastoral scene bordered in genuine gold leaf equaled half a clerk's yearly salary, daring him to dream of presenting it as a betrothal gift. Beyond public hierarchies, private signatures hid in plain sight, Parisian workshops collaborated with calligraphers to entwine initials at the base of every guard. Filigreed, so deftly that only a lover who knew the angle of light would discern them. Birmingham painters, fond of playful codes, sometimes rendered monograms in flower language, anemone for the first letter, hibiscus for the second, forget-me-not for the last. Onlookers saw only a bouquet, intimates traced letters petal by petal. Some sweethearts went further, commissioning a jeweller to carve a locket cavity inside the headstick, no wider than a barleycorn, where a twist of hair or rolled tight sketch could rest against the rivet screw, warmed each time the fan was flicked open. Hidden love notes found refuge too on the paper leaves stretched between sticks. One method required minute pinpricks arranged among painted clouds. When sunlight shone through, the tiny constellations drew words upon a wall: "Be true, return," sentences brief enough to vanish when the fan closed. Others trusted invisible ink distilled from rice milk. The secret surfaced only when the beloved breathed warm air across the scene, mist-revealing letters just long enough for reading before fading again, leaving an unbroken pastoral in its stead. With decades and dust, such treasures now reach modern collectors in varied condition. Restoring them demands gentleness akin to sleep itself. Conservators begin by letting each fan rest inside an archival box for several days, allowing fibers to rehumidify after attic aridity. Sandalwood responds well to a whisper of camellia oil brushed along the grain with sable. Too much and the pivot swells shut, too little and the wood reverts to brittleness. Mother of pearl calls for distilled water misted from afar, the droplets softened first through linen, so no direct bead shocks the shell. Once supple, seams accept a breath of fish glue warmed between fingertip and palm, the same quiet recipe used a century past. Papier-mâché differs, craving silence and shade rather than moisture. Varnish crazing may be coaxed flat under low heat from a lamp set at safe distance. Beneath the mellow glow, the lacquer relaxes the way frost melts on a pond. Chips fill with shellac tinted by ground charcoal until the join resembles night at new moon. Throughout, any invasive polish is discouraged. A softened gleam, as though viewed through candle smoke, honors the fan's age more faithfully than mirror brightness. When monograms appear dulled, curators polish them only with jeweler's cloth steeped in lavender sachets, the scent discouraging silverfish, yet subtle enough not to overpower sandalwood's native aroma. As for hidden notes, ethics guides the hand. If humidity or heat might erase the message, conservators often choose secrecy over revelation, preserving potential rather than risking loss. In that choice lies a gesture to the past as respectful as the first shy flourish of a fan offered in greeting. Each restored piece, once again able to unfold like a sigh, reminds onlookers that craftsmanship and class are not rival claims but interwoven threads. The maker lending skill, the owner lending care, together composing an object that teaches patience by its very fragility. What was once an emblem of fleeting fashion survives as a small architecture of grace, proportion, and whispering wood, still releasing echoes of promenade music and lamplight whenever its guards part. As a chapter ebbs, the faint glow of workshop lanterns dims, sanding dust and pearl shavings settling like soft snow across benches now quiet. Present time slows to the hush of a fan at rest, its secrets folded within. Beyond the workshop walls, a breeze stirs garden branches and carries promises toward the verandas and terraces where social breezes will soon mingle with night air. The story drifts onward, ready to follow those silent currents into the next gentle exploration. After the hush of the conservatory, where the faint perfume of white jasmine lingered upon invisible currents, the narrative drifts inward, following the lingering echo of a whispered promise. Velvet night still presses against the tall windows, yet the music within is a softer tide, retreating and returning, as if drawing breath with the gleam of crystal chandeliers. A low rustle of taffeta accompanies distant laughter, like reeds bending before a stream. In that transitional hush, silk slippers pause at the threshold of another realm, no longer the secluded garden of murmured confidences, but the vast parquet floor where coded steps and fluttered fans will soon weave their intricate spell. In the great rooms of social expectation, each polished board seems charged with unseen currents. The quadrille, modest to the casual eye, unfolds like a miniature campaign, its 5 figures mapping alliances, feints, and rapprochements with the precision of cartographers tracing borders. Partners join, separate, then reform formations. All appears gracious, almost idle, yet every bow, every pivot, is weighed with possibility. Even the pauses between movements are cultivated silences, spaces in which a glance may be returned or allowed to dissolve, and in which reputations may rise, briefly tremble, or quietly fall. Notes from the string ensemble drift above the dancers like pale ribbons, binding couples into temporary compacts. Footfalls are light, but intention is heavy. Within measured counts, feelings advance, but retreat beneath the complacent gaze of gilded cornices. A gentleman lifts an arm, permitting his partner to glide beneath. The gesture, outwardly orthodox, adjusts the angle of her shoulder just enough to shield a flick of her handheld breeze. The fan, half opened, positions itself like a semaphore of silk and ivory, speaking in a silent tongue older than any printed program. Within this lexicon of flutter and fold, the quadrille offers luxuriant cover. When the second figure requires the lady's chain, fans travel in graceful circles, mirroring the dancer's trajectory. A quick tap upon the wrist conveys amusement. The fan closed swiftly and placed against the heart, a guarded preference. All seems accidental, as though the temperature simply calls for increased draught, yet those attuned to the code understand. Acceptance, refusal, anticipation, all slipping beneath the restrained harmonies. The orchestra, unaware, continues its unhurried cadence, framing confidences so quiet they scarcely disturb the candelabra's unwavering blaze. Parallel to this silent conversation hangs the modest dance card, suspended from a ribbon, resting against satin bodices and brocade waistcoats. Its neat columns cotillon, mazurka, waltz appear administrative, yet the tiny pencil marks govern the evening's emotional topography. A name penciled lightly may be erased with equal ease, while a heavier inscription announces resolve. During the quadrille's interludes, gloves brush pocket watches, fingertips find graphite, and the ledger of anticipated steps subtly shifts. Thus, the card and the fan, one recording intention, the other projecting desire, operate in twin orbits, each concealing the other's secret momentum. Chaperones patrol the perimeter with practiced serenity, their eyes tranquil pools that nonetheless reflect every ripple. Shawls rest over forearms, lorgnettes glimmer, and conversation floats like lace upon water, yet vigilance never lapses. They note the fraction of a heartbeat in which a gaze lingers too warmly, or a promenade extends one pivot too long. They count chairs left vacant beside folding screens and monitor the path to the refreshment table as though surveying a narrow bridge. Their presence is meant to cool the air, to keep bloodless the commerce of admiration. But ingenuity thrives where restriction breathes. The dancers, apprenticed to decorum, cultivate deviations so small they masquerade as exactitude. A gentleman, pretending to study his cuff, allows his partner to inscribe an initial upon his dance card while the chaperone's line of sight is broken by a passing butler. A lady, adjusting the fall of her glove, turns her wrist just enough for a closed fan to rest against her pulse, a signal that tomorrow's garden ride should commence at noon. Such maneuvers rely upon rhythm. A miscount would expose the scheme, yet the quadrille's dependable cadence protects conspirators like a mother's lullaby. Almac's assembly rooms, austere beneath their Grecian frieze, host these nightly ballets of subtlety. The patronesses, guardians of exclusivity, dispense vouchers sparingly, entrance itself as prelude to triumph. Within the long room, columns rise like white sentinels, separating alcoves where conversation is filtered into muffled fragments. The floor gleams mirror-like beneath hundreds of beeswax candles, and the scent of lemon-scented pomatum mingles with freshly cut greenery arranged along the walls. Here, rumors may travel faster than reels, yet the fan's quick whisper remains sovereign, eluding even the most industrious gossip. Consider, amid one mild April assembly, the quiet campaign of Miss Eleanor Grant and Captain Julian Fairfax. She arrives clad in palaced hyacinth blue, fan carved of mother of pearl, its painted scene depicting swans on a moonlit lake. He, recently returned from service abroad, stands at ease beside the orchestra, uniform replaced by sober evening coat, though the posture of command still hovers about his shoulders. Their acquaintance is sanctioned yet slight. An aunt introduced them at a lending library a fortnight earlier, but opportunity has not ripened until this moment when quadrille music softens the edges of protocol. Eleanor's dance card bears every line but two already claimed, and the captain aware of the importance of appearing neither too eager nor too languid requests. The first open sequence, the fourth quadrille. She hesitates, not from uncertainty but strategy, then nods as her fan flutters once, signifying acceptance. The aunt, seating herself near the refreshment table, approves the arrangement, though she will later recall only vague impressions of spinning skirts. For Eleanor and Julian, the forthcoming figures promise a corridor of speechless candor, cushioned by violins and watched by multitudes yet possessed by none. When the fourth set arrives, other couples filter onto the floor like petals following a breeze. Eleanor feels the polished surface glide beneath her slippers, while the captain catches the faint fragrance of lavender water as she draws near. Opening figures proceed with immaculate courtesy. During the chain, their hands meet briefly. Eleanor's fan rests half open against her cheek in admission of interest, masked as mere cooling. In the chassé croise, they exchange opposite positions, and Julian, lifting a brow by a measure's breadth, registers the message. A fully open fan held aloft means wait for me after the final turn. The last notes linger, dissolving into clapping that is polite, yet not insistent. Couples disperse. Eleanor retreats toward her aunt, but the fan remains delicately outstretched, collecting neither dust nor air, only confidence. Minutes drift like snowflakes inside a globe. Later, during a subsequent waltz in which Eleanor is engaged elsewhere, Julian positions himself near a marble column, apparently absorbed in the fresco overhead. When her partner returns her to the edge, the fan snaps shut, and its ivory guard touches her lips. Secrecy, resolution, the aunt, distracted by a neighbour's anecdote of embassy balls, misses the silent pledge. At evening's close, when footmen ready cloaks and carriages, Eleanor precedes her chaperone down the broad staircase. Lamps cast buttery halos upon the stone. Outside, the mild night carries the scent of rain yet to fall. Julian waits beneath a portico, ostensibly consulting his watch. As carriages wheel forward, he steps aside, permitting others to pass, until Eleanor's hem brushes the threshold. At that instant her fan relaxes, half open, resting against her heart. "I share your sentiment." He bows with formal precision, yet the angle of his glove against his waistcoat resembles a mirror image of that gentle curve answer received, acknowledged, cherished. Their parting, public and proper, coats the fledgling understanding in layers of unspoken promise. Later letters, conveyed through approved channels, will render the mute grammar of fans into the softer cadences of ink, yet none will ever eclipse the grave sweetness of that quadrille when thought travelled faster than speech. In memory, chandeliers will always shimmer slightly, as though listening. The parquet's compass rose will forever point toward possibility, and the restrained breathing of the orchestra will remain an invisible witness. Even the subtle warmth of wax cooling upon sconces seems part of the memory, holding the very shape of their mingled breaths. Almack, so often accused of severity, becomes in their recollection a sanctuary, its rules a lattice upon which quiet roses learn to climb. Thus the ballroom, for all its supervised symmetry, serves as a laboratory where reticence discovers ingenious expression, and where constraint nurtures creativity more deftly than freedom might dare. In the next movement of this gentle exploration, attention turns from swirling company to the private chamber where folded vellum and careful ink extend the dialogue begun by silk and sandalwood. Somewhere, a solitary violinist packs away his instrument, each click of the case a final punctuation to the evening's eloquent silence. For now, the music fades to a calm, water-light hush, leaving only the muted beat of departing hooves and the lingering fragrance of jasmine brought in from the earlier conservatory, an aroma that beckons toward the soft rustle of letters waiting to be written. The hush of the winter conservatory still lingers, as though moonlit chrysanthemums continued to curtsy long after the orchestra has slipped away. From that gentle tableau the story drifts outward, following the faint rustle of folded paper and the low breath of distant breezes, to lands where the language of the fan threaded itself through many tongues and many textures of cloth. Across the Irish Sea, lace-makers in small stone cottages coaxed filigrees from flax with fingers, numbed by cold peat winds. The Irish lace delicate yet durable bore patterns of meadow blossoms and watery ferns, quiet emblems of endurance in a landscape often troubled. When such lace trimmed a fan, it murmured of perseverance, of mornings when mist clung to hedgerows, but the hearth still glowed. In parlors far away, observers understood the message without a word. Here was resilience softened into beauty, sorrow transmuted into snow-fine thread. Southward, the twilight courtyards of Andalusia echoed with guitar chords, casting a different spell upon lace. Spanish needleworkers balanced black silk against white skin, weaving baroque spirals that summoned both cathedral shadows and flamenco firelight. A Spanish lace-edged fan unfurled like a dark wing, hinting at ardor restrained by ritual. One slow sweep across the cheek suggested devotion under watchful saints. A sharper snap sign signaled desire impatience could no longer disguise. Thus two kinds of lace Irish, Palace dawn, Spanish midnight became contrasting dialects in a shared vocabulary of flutter and fold. Steamships carried these dialects to distant colonies where climates, customs and colours demanded adaptation. In the sultry drawing rooms of Calcutta and Bombay, punkah fans swayed overhead, stirred by servants yet steered by empire. Still, European women craving familiarity kept smaller handheld fans near, lined not with goose-down mufflers but with airy tussar silk that breathed in monsoon heat. Local embroiderers stitched peacocks beside shamrocks, mango leaves beside Castilian scrolls, until each panel resembled a small treaty between continents. A half-hidden tilt toward the temple might ask for jasmine water, a concealed tap against the wrist might dismiss a prying sahab. Under chandeliers of cut glass imported from Birmingham, the soft click of sandalwood ribs marked the threshold where imperial protocol yielded to vernacular grace. Further south, in Australian settlements overshadowed by blue gum forests, the night air often smelled of eucalyptus and distant surf. Society balls in Melbourne or Sydney required finery shipped round the Cape, yet the voyage was long and the dust of the goldfields could dull the brightest silk. Local artisans therefore trimmed replacement fans with plaited possum fur or pressed wattle blossoms between gauze layers, creating curiosities both colonial and tender. When a bush-born debutante raised such a fan at the height of a quadrille, she carried echoes of cattle stations and kookaburra laughter into the chandeliered hall. That faint mingling of outback and ballroom spoke a private promise. Memory of open horizons would never be fully folded away. While lace and sandalwood attended the well-titled Paper workshops and penny bazaars pleaded their own case on the cobblestone fringes. Working-class sweethearts who could not afford true Irish or Spanish filigree embraced machine-stamped imitation instead. Pleasure gardens on Saturday evenings bloomed not only with gaslit blossoms but with bright fans printed in aniline dyes, robin egg, mustard, vermilion. One sheet of stiffened paper, 2 wooden sticks and a dab of glue sufficed. Beneath Chinese lanterns and tinny band music, a girl in borrowed satin might hide a giggle behind her cheap fan, the gesture as eloquent as any duchess's secret salute. In that brief, perfumed dusk, the gulf between costermonger and countess narrowed to the width of a folded crease. Arrival halls at Liverpool, Boston, and Buenos Aires widened the conversation still further. Immigrants from Galicia stood beside tailors from Limerick. Seamstresses from Madras brushed skirts with Baltic milliners. Their fans, if they owned any, became passports of pattern. A Sicilian mother reused lace from a christening gown to bind bamboo spokes picked up at a dockside stall. A Jewish refugee stitched Hebrew letters so tiny they resembled mere ornament, unless one leaned close. Shared experience of transit fostered new grammar. A quarter turn of the wrist could ask a stranger, "Which ship?" A swift close-open echo replied, "Steerage, but hope afloat." Long before formal languages were learned, gesture settled anxieties, offered friendship, or invited guarded flirtation across deck rails and hostel bunks. Scholars later tracing these sign streams noticed curious fusions. The Irish circle along the cheek, once expressing constancy, merged with the Andalusian, fan at heart of fervent promise, yielding a hybrid gesture meaning simply, "I remember home when I look at you." In Singapore, Peranakan brides adopted the English code for yes fan, held aloft in left hand, but executed it with the delicate wrist flick used by Hokkien opera dancers, blending continents in a single lull-soft motion. Threads of symbol even crossed the brittle boundaries of class. A London scullery maid, having polished silver platters all afternoon, might steal a moment behind the servant door and test a gesture she had glimpsed upstairs. 3 slow taps against the chin, a coy refusal. Though her fan was no more than folded bread rucker stiffened with starch, the movement lent dignity. Conversely, a baronet's daughter, weary of expectations, might borrow from fair-brand children the jaunty 2-beat snap that signified carefree codes, were porous, meaning seeped through like rain through garden trellis, feeding violets on opposing sides. If lace clothed the message, ribs carried rhythm. Irish makers favoured whalebone pale, pliant, close-grained, while Spanish craftsmen preferred ebony streaked with abalone. On India's western coast, mango wood rubbed with ghee emitted a faint, sweet warmth when warmed by palms. In Sydney, river-red gum provided a resinous scent of summer dust. Thus, even when eyes failed to notice embroidery, ears might detect character from the hollow clap of ebony to the muffled whisper of whalebone, confirming whether flirtation sprang from Atlantic fog or Mediterranean dusk. Gradually, manufactured novelty threatened handmade nuance, yet the quiet grammar endured. When Birmingham factories released tin fans stamped with lithographs of royal jubilees, curious soon reported passengers aboard night trains flicking such tins to signal shared seating arrangements. A raised print of Queen Victoria might nod approval for borrowed blankets, while a fold across the sovereign's face could mean "Speak softly, sleepers near." Utility did not extinguish poetry. It merely shifted cadence toward modern vibrations of wheel and rail. Beneath all variance lay a common hush, an understanding that movement slowed, measured, repeated could soothe as well as signify. The very act of drawing cooler air toward flushed cheeks forged a rhythm akin to lullaby. Whether beneath thatched Connemara roofs, Moorish arches, or corrugated colonial verandas, countless hands found in the fan a metronome for memories, a discreet conductor of communal breath. Each opening resembled an inhalation, each closing an exhale. And in that oscillation strangers felt less estranged, lovers less lonely, migrants less adrift. Past midnight, when pleasure gardens dimmed and verandas emptied, many fans were set beside pillows, the scent of gum, sandalwood, or violet starch drifting upward with dreams. Some would travel on to other continents, others crumble into fragile petals of paper. Yet for a time they had bridged class, creed, and coastline, proof that graceful motion can knit together what rigid speech might rend apart. Beyond the horizon of this reflection lies another chamber of quiet wonders, ingenious mechanisms tucked within tortoiseshell guards, hidden springs that allowed messages to unfold, not only across borders but through secret pockets of time. Toward that chamber the narration now glides, as the last breath of lace-scented wind settles and a new almost imperceptible ticking begins. Lantern light dwindled until it resembled a lone pearl resting on velvet, and the murmured music that had drifted across the terrace became no more than the hush of leaves brushing stone. From that gentle diminuendo the story glides onward, deeper into the drawing rooms and conservatories where gossip blooms as fragrantly as any orchid. The season's earlier innocence fans flickering like butterflies, glances darting like dragonflies now meets the prickle of misunderstanding, a single misplaced gesture, a fur lifted 1 inch too high, and rumors tempted to curl around it the way ivy seeks a wall, slow yet unstoppable in its hunger. Morning papers, freshly ironed by discreet footmen, carry society columns trimmed with lilac-tinted borders. Within those margins correspondents compose courteous laments for last evening's blunders, the viscount who waved an ebony fan meant for farewell, yet appeared to beckon. The debutante whose quick pivot exposed the underside of lace, prompting whispers of brazen promise. Editors lace the prose with polite ellipses, but readers hear the hiss beneath the silk. Thus errors, small as pins, are pinned indeed, glinting beneath candlelight for every eye that seeks diversion during the slow unfurling of the noon heat in the languid city that summer. Caricaturists, ever watchful from attic studios, scented with turpentine, seize upon these slips. Their lithographs appear in weekly miscellanies, panels shaded in lavender and lampblack, presenting grand ballrooms where fans swell to improbable dimensions, each rib etched with cryptic commandments. One caption sighs, "When a syllable would suffice," she drafts an encyclopedia. Another depicts a gentleman buried beneath cascading chiffon, the speech balloon reading, "I merely asked the time." Laughter, harmless at first blush, begins to thin the lacquer of reverence surrounding courtship ritual, yet even mockery unfurls in slow, almost soporific spirals, preserving the dreamlike hush of late evenings. Beyond the jester's ink, more solemn chambers register the consequences. Solicitors straighten cravats, magistrates adjust spectacles, and court clerks spread folios where testimonies glimmer like pressed petals. A breach of promise suit might hinge on whether a fan, flicked twice toward the heart, constituted binding intent or merely careless breeze. Plaintiffs recall entire sequences, the half-circle, the sudden stillness, the faint inclination of ivory sticks. Defendants counter with accounts of draughts, overcrowding, and tremors of fatigue. The court, caught between poetics and precedent, listens while dust motes float as peacefully as snow, settling upon wigs, cuffs, and the cool mahogany rail that day. In private salons, such proceedings echo like faint thunder beyond distant hills. Hostesses, unwilling to risk even a rumor of impropriety, revise guest lists with a new vigilance. Invitations, once bordered in joyous gilt, now carry restrained grey, and small penciled notation reminds recipients that communicative fluttering is best moderated by chaperones. Carnations replace roses at supper tables. Their meaning, politely neutral, will not inflame scribes searching for symbolism. Yet, despite precaution, hearts still beat their quiet tattoo beneath brocade. One misinterpreted sigh, or hastily folded fan may still awaken the dreaded pen of the colonist before dawning social reckoning. Observers note, with the languor of scholars paging through dusty folios, that the language of the fan has outgrown its cradle. What began as coy code between moonlit gazes has become, through repetition, a baroque grammar rivaling ancient law. The weight of complexity bends the very sticks of sandalwood. A simple message, yes, no, wait now, requires choreography fit for a corps de ballet, and dancers stumble. Polite society, lulled by earlier chapters of fragrant secrecy, now feels the strain along invisible seams. The possibility of backlash hovers like a cool mist, almost refreshing, almost foretelling a storm, yet utterly without sound. Even the gardens participate in this mood of suspended warning. Blossoms close earlier as though preferring discretion. Fountains seem to hush their crystalline chatter before twilight's first star. Lovers still wander gravel paths, yet their silhouettes linger at a measured distance, fans clasped but unopened, fearful that a chance moth might twist the silk and signal devotion unintended. Somewhere, an owl blinks, patient keeper of nocturnal secrets, its feathered rotations slower than any human turn. Nature teaches restraint here, demonstrating that silence can bloom as fully as song, and that pause may cradle deeper promise than declaration under muted lanterns. In parlors scented with bergamot, grandmothers recall older codes drops of a handkerchief, tucking of gloves simpler, earthly, and less exposed to mischief. Their recollections drift like wood smoke, urging a return to calm ordinariness. Yet the younger generation, half enchanted by novelty, half anxious under the weight of scrutiny, hovers between stubborn fidelity to fashion and yearning for release. They study serialized scandals, compare engraved cartoons, and practice abbreviated gestures in mirrors that blur with condensation. At times, the reflected room appears doubled, as though society occupies at once, one reaching forward in longing, the other leaning back in caution for balance. Music, too, adapts to the climate. Conductors, sensing public unease, choose adagios over waltzes, allowing dancers to float rather than spin. Bowed strings linger on each note, creating space where misinterpretation cannot hide. For stillness is a mirror polished by silence. In these measured intervals, the rustle of programs, the soft folding of fans, and the faint heartbeat of anticipation form a subtle counter-melody. Yet even here, uncertainty glimmers. A held breath might be read as yearning or as doubt. The entire whole becomes an instrument, resonant with delicate vibrations of what is spoken and what is withheld for safety. Meanwhile, printers labor through candlelit hours, setting type for pamphlets titled Queries on Appropriate Conduct. These slim volumes circulate alongside novels and sermons, their pages alternating admonition and gentle poetry. One essay proposes abolishing coded motions altogether, advocating instead for honest speech tempered by civility. Another defends the tradition as an art deserving preservation, provided participants undergo careful tutelage. Paper edges flutter like wings in railway carriages, where passengers read, ponder, and look out at pastureland rolling past in twilight gold. Opinions accumulate gradually, like sediment within a quiet riverbed, hinting at the shape of change without yet diverting the current. Through all of this, the thin line between flirtation and impropriety shimmers like a ribbon in lamplight, visible, enticing and unpredictably mobile. Courtiers who once danced along it with instinctual grace now measure each step as though treading frost beneath fragile china. Some retreat entirely, embracing studious reserve, others proceed defiantly, delighting in notoriety, their reputations becoming nocturnal blooms that open only under scandal's glow. Yet most remain in the middle ground, guided by intuition and the wish to be both admired and safe. Their caution adds a hushed counterpoint to society's usual sparkle, a gentle dimming rather than eclipse altogether. The swelling tension, though gentle, is unmistakable. It moves through conversation as a faint vibration passes through crystal, causing only the slightest tremor but portending fracture should the frequency rise. Friends exchange glances over teacups, slowing their sentences until they resemble ripples crossing still water. Correspondences lengthen, ink flows in elaborate loops, as writers labor to anchor intent within unambiguous phrases, refusing the shorthand of feathers and lace. Paradoxically, the search for certainty most often reveals its absence. Words grow heavy, tilting on the page, and the reader feels the pull of silence again. Vast, expectant, almost consoling in twilight. Yet calm endures, sustained by small gestures of kindness, a shawl arranged over a neighbour's shoulders, a tranquil harpsichord prelude offered before supper, a library window left ajar, so the scent of late jasmine may pacify restless thoughts. These mercies spread quietly, resisting any chronicler's quill. They dwell in spaces subtler than scandal, softer than newsprint. When the day's commentary feels brittle, such generosities provide the pliant thread that keeps the tapestry intact. No proclamation announces them, yet many feel the relief, and in that collective sigh the night air grows warmer, dreamier, almost perfumed with relief beneath quiet constellations. So the chapter settles, like dusk upon leaded glass. Observing without judgment the tableau of misreads and mishaps, it is gently unrolled. The picture is neither tragic nor comic, but balanced on the breath that drifts between two candle flames. Scandal may brandish its subtle blade, satire may raise amused eyebrows, and law may attempt to trap moonlighting parchment. Yet beneath these motions, humanity continues its measured exhale, longing to be understood. Overcoding, underspeaking, promising by accident each error, is a step in a slow gavotte, whose music is older than etiquette and softer than regret, drifting across remembered gardens. Beyond the garden walls, an almost imperceptible breeze gathers, bringing with it rumors of forthcoming moderation, a quiet contemplation that etiquette, to survive, may soon rearrange its own reflections. The air moves through corridors and across still water. carrying tentative melodies from the next ballroom where, perhaps, the fan will close for a while and words will open like dawn-colored roses. For now the hush remains, patient and observant, as fires sink to embers. Somewhere a clock strikes, neither warning nor summons, merely marking the gentle passage toward the following chapter, where reconciliation and renewal may wander into view with grace. The departing murmur of Chapter 7 lingers like a pale plume of breath upon winter glass, for the last image was a lantern fading behind gauzy curtains where lace gloves were folded away. In that hush, the story drifts onward, floating into galleries, parlors and playhouses where slender fans continue their quiet discourse, witnessed now not by promenading couples alone, but by artists, authors, and audiences entranced by every subtle tilt of ivory or mother of pearl. Paint first receives the flutter. On canvases of the pre-Raphaelites, the fan appears almost by chance, an accessory half hidden among river lilies or rose-strewn brocade, yet each feathered curve stands as visual testimony that secret speech thrived far beyond ballroom walls. In Dante Gabriel Rossetti's Venus Verticordia, a shell-shaped fan nestles against gold-tinted tresses, its delicate ribs echoing the goddess's heart-stirring glance. Desire proclaimed, decorum preserved. William Holman Hunt lets lamplight glimmer across the pierced sticks of a sandalwood fan, resting in the awakening conscience, the panel suggesting both concealment and dawning revelation as the young woman rises from her lover's knee. And in John Everett Millais' The Bridesmaid, the folded fan lies untouched on a sill, hinting that words once whispered through painted silk have fallen silent, love imprisoned by unspoken doubts. Though unsigned by brushstroke, the lexicon of gesture is legible in every careful placement, each painterly hush a footnote to the elaborate etiquette manuals of the day. Critics of the time, attuned to the pre-Raphaelite fondness for symbolism, wrote of lilies meaning innocence and apple blossoms meaning temptation, yet few noted that the fan too spoke in this emblematic tongue. Its arc could veil a blush, its swift snap could declare impatience, its measured sway could promise constancy. Thus the canvases doubled as quiet handbooks. Viewers strolling beneath skylit exhibition halls might sense instinct stirring, recognizing that a modest implement could harness an entire alphabet of longing. The gallery, like a chapel, taught in silence, observe the fan, learn the language. Beyond the painted frame, theatre welcomed the whispering prop with flamboyant grace. Under gaslight and gilded proscenium, Oscar Wilde orchestrated fans as though they were lines of dialogue too delicate for speech. In Lady Windermere's fan, the playwright guides performers to open or shut the satin wings with rhythmic precision. Meanings flutter between characters faster than gossip can circle the stalls. A rustling flourish punctuates Lady Windermere's indignation, while the soft semicircle held before her mouth marks an instant of dangerous reflection. Wilde, who adored surfaces that gleamed with moral subtext, understood that what is hidden can be louder than what is declared. His stage directions, almost balletic, ensure that each audience member reads gesture as surely as witty epigram. Thus a fan becomes both shield and sword, protecting reputation while slicing through hypocrisy. Contemporary reviewers praised the exquisite movements of Wilde's heroines, yet some were puzzled by the fervour accorded so small an object. Playgoers, however, accepted the shorthand instinctively. They had witnessed similar exchanges in drawing rooms and park pavilions. Theatre then functioned as a mirror and a tutor, reinforcing codes already familiar while refining them into art. Long after final applause, patrons would retrace favoured scenes within their own memories, perhaps imitating the graceful pivot of a wrist while contemplating letters yet unwritten. While plays dazzled in single evenings, serialized novels lent the fan a slower, aching rhythm. Chapter endings, printed in weekly installments, often left heroines halfway through an ambiguous gesture. A fan raised to half-mast, a glimpse of painted silk caught between candle flame and shadow. Such poised suspense urged readers to return, hearts tugged by the wish to know whether concealment would harden into refusal or blossom into confession. In the cliff-edged corridors of feuilleton publishing, subtlety proved more rousing than any overt declaration, for uncertainty amplified yearning. Turning pages by lamplight, readers might pause to imagine their own fingertips tracing bamboo ribs, rehearsing messages for drawing rooms not yet entered. Consider a widely read novel of the era in which a beleaguered heroine keeps a dove-grey breeze fan at her side. At the close of one installment, she flicks it shut while a rival gentleman kneels nearby. The chapter stops mid-movement, causing correspondents across counties to debate whether the snap signified ality or fleeting peak. By the next issue, author and audience together savor the slow unfolding ink meeting expectation like breath meeting mirror. The fan's incremental journey mirrors the novel's structure. Revelation deferred, desire disclosed by measured degrees. In all these mediums, paint, stage, and print, the fan hovers between concealment and revelation, that poised threshold where secrets are protected even as they long to unfurl. Concealment, after all, is seldom absolute. The translucent lace, the carved sliver of tortoiseshell, the filigreed sticks, each allows glints of skin, glimpses of eyes, edges of smile. Revelation, likewise, is never crude. It occurs by suggestion, an artful erosion of distance, rather than a dramatic unmasking. Thus the fan is not gateway or barrier, but a ripple along the borderland, shaping tension without breaking it. Philosophers of aesthetics might call this the charm of the liminal. To Victorians well-versed in moral restraint, the fan granted a socially acceptable limbo, where an appetite could dance, yet not devour, where the pulse quickened, but the pulse could not be seen. In that fragile space, identity might be woven anew, the shy debutante borrowing confidence, the worldly widow reclaiming innocence, the suitor discovering humility in the face of wordless replies. Every person who lifted or lowered the fragile half-circle became playwright of a private narrative, audience to a suspense of their own devising. Popular media, always alert to profitable allure, amplified the code until it shimmered across every stratum of society. Fashion plates in illustrated weeklies annotated the correct angle for a flirtatious breeze. Sheet music publishers added vignettes of fans poised atop pianos, promising that the tune inside would guide dancers toward unspoken confessions. Photographers invited sitters to drape fans across velvet laps, turning the studio portrait into a still from a romance yet to be written. Even advertising joined the hush. Perfume companies stamped bottles with tiny open fans, suggesting that one scent, carefully chosen, could transform a casual breath into invitation. Such reinforcement did more than popularize, it standardized. The regional variations persisted. Seaside promenades nurtured a carefree swish, while London club windows demanded subtler cadence. There emerged a shared lexicon, recognizable from Edinburgh to Exeter. Mass culture distilled nuance into near universality, ensuring that a gesture glimpsed on canvas or stage could be replicated with confidence at any assembly. The code remained mutable enough for invention, yet stable enough to reassure. One could improvise fresh phrases, but the basic grammar, the tilt that asks, the flutter that refuses, was widely understood. And yet, despite this proliferation, the fan's magic never dulls under exposure, for each use pulses with individual longing and personal risk. A painted scene may show a single moment, but behind it trembles a lifetime of hopes, fears, and careful rehearsals. The play may end in sparkling applause, yet the actress's heartbeat during that pivotal flutter remains uniquely her own. The serialized novel may be consumed by thousands, yet every reader's hush between installments belongs only to that solitary imagination. Thus, the code endures, endlessly shared, eternally intimate. In dim galleries where vanish whispers of linseed oil, in theatres where curtains billow like twilight seas, in parlors where pages rustle faintly as moths, the fan continues to breathe its softened messages. It holds within its slender bones the paradox of distance and nearness, of propriety and passion, of silence swelling into song. Even as time drifts forward and fashions evolve, the poised half-circle retains its power to summon hush, to cradle expectation, to choreograph the invisible currents that flow between glances. Beyond tonight's reflection lie quieter corridors yet to be explored, corridors where master craftsmen carve sandalwood into latticed sighs, and gilded ateliers stitch silk wings for dancers of the midnight quadrille. There, artistry merges with ritual, technique with tenderness. Toward that gentle domain Chapter 9 will glide, tracing the making of the fan itself, the patient shaping, the painted blossom, the final scented ribbon before those silent feathers ever greet a waiting hand. The lanterns of the previous chapter still glimmer faintly in memory, their glow thinning with the dawn of a new century. In that pale pearly light, the once ubiquitous fan lingers at the edges of parlors and gardens, no longer the center of conversation, but a gentle ghost of older evenings. Edwardian mornings arrive crisp and confident, carrying a cadence of innovation. Copper wires hum inside freshly painted walls, and soft bells ring from polished telephones. Voices that once travelled by fluttering sandalwood now travel through coiled cords. Private, immediate, unburdened by choreography. Courtship loosens its stays. Young couples stroll without chaperones, sketching plans aloud rather than spelling secrets in ivory slats. The fan, still lovely, discovers that it is being overlooked, its silent alphabet outpaced by spoken words. Fashion, too, trims away excess. Skirts glide closer to the silhouette. Hems no longer need acres of fabric to sweep across a ballroom. With fewer folds to conceal it, a fan feels conspicuous, superfluous. Handbags shrink into dainty reticules, just roomy enough for a calling card, a powder puff, perhaps a slim letter, but seldom the breadth of carved bone and painted silk. Where once a fan completed an ensemble, now it threatens to disturb new streamlined lines, and so it is left behind upon dressing tables, gathering a film of scented dust. Manufacturers, unwilling to surrender entirely, adapt with quiet ingenuity. They turn toward the seaside and the exposition hall, printing bright souvenir scenes on paper leaves, sunsets over crescents of sand, domes of glass and steel, mottos of holiday towns. Shops give them away with jars of cold cream. Theatres slip them into programs emblazoned with advertisements. Yet these fans, though cheerful, speak no secret dialect. They wave merely for breeze, then find their way into scrapbooks, their utilitarian hinges rusting in silence. Then, like a distant drumroll that grows day by day, war clouds gather. Ration books replace fashion plates. Silk is requisitioned, wood reserved for crutches and propellers. Practicality reigns. A nurse might keep a humble cardboard fan at her apron's waist to stir the stagnant air, but the gesture is work, not flirtation. Letters from the front contain no mention of which motion of the wrist means yearning. The language of survival has no patience for the language of longing. When armistice finally arrives, the world is older and leaner. People learn to love with fewer props, to speak directly, or to write plainly on inexpensive paper. Fans return mostly as heirlooms, mother-of-pearl sticks sleeping inside velvet boxes, their ribbons loosened, their scents faded to a faint whisper of orris root. Grandchildren open the lids, marvel at the miniature paintings, yet cannot decode a single flourish. The alphabet has slipped and recorded between the pages of time. Still, somewhere beyond the hush of attics and archives, certain breezes remember. A forgotten draft through a corridor stirs a folded leaf, and for an instant the room seems to inhale the past. That shimmer scarcely, more than dust motes, in a shaft of afternoon sun gently points toward our next. And final, exploration. How fragments of this fragile conversation linger, waiting to be rediscovered, pressed like petals between the covers of memory. As the imagined whisper of folding silk still hovers in the quiet we have woven together, the story unfurls once more, this time in the soft glow of modern halls, where memories are not relics under glass, but living motions repeated with deliberate grace. The lace-edged fan has been set down, yet its shadow remains, guiding present-day hands that reach, not for urgency, but for continuity and calm. Evenings in community centres and candlelit ballrooms see dancers gliding to violins tuned in respectful imitation of centuries gone by. Gowns rustle, waistcoats shimmer, and each partner steps precisely into patterns charted long before. Electricity hummed in the walls. Here, historical dance societies do not merely reenact, they revive a cultural cadence, translating etiquette into movement, and movement into quiet conversation. No microphone is needed. The swirl of a skirt, the exact angle of a bow say everything softly. Those who gather learn, without speaking, that courtesy can be choreographed, and that consent so often discussed may be offered wordlessly by an extended hand, a patient pause, the freedom to decline with nothing more than a gentle incline of the head. Workshops bloom in borrowed libraries, converted barns, and museum courtyards fragrant with late evening roses. Volunteers spread linen cloths over folding tables and lay out reproduction fans beside careful stacks of instructional cards. Participants trace the ribs of paper leaf fans, painting blossoms in hushed colours, listening to curators describe how a closed fan once meant privacy, how a half-hidden face invited, or declined, a closer step. The making is as meditative as the learning. Brushes dip, pigments swirl, time stretches as a calm ribbon, and the old vocabulary of flutter, tilt, and stillness finds a place among modern fingertips tapping smartphone screens. Just an hour before, Docents move among the groups like kindly ghost from parlors past, demonstrating that a fan opened wide is less a flourish than an announcement. I am present, I am prepared to be seen. By contrast, a fan held shield-like before the heart remains an almost universal gesture of self-protection. In these workshops, such subtleties become shared knowledge, and the shared knowledge, in turn, becomes permission to be delicate in an age that often demands declaration at full volume. The lesson is not nostalgia, it is mindfulness and art of sensing what silence can do. Museums themselves have begun to breathe differently. They curate twilight gatherings where display cases are unlocked, and replicas passed from hand to hand. The quiet click of glass lids, the collective inhalation as fragile spines are lifted, craft an atmosphere at once reverent and inviting. Under subdued lighting, visitors practice aligning a fan's arc with the line of the collarbone, feeling how a fraction of an inch alters the entire message. There is a tenderness shared among strangers while they steward the past together, an unspoken promise to handle both artifact and one another with equal gentleness. Beyond ballroom and gallery, the language of the fan flickers unexpectedly through contemporary romance fiction. Novelists, captivated by the elegance of coded gesture, thread references into modern plots set in coffee shops and shared ride cars. A heroine hiding nervous excitement behind a takeaway cup recalls an ancestor who masked her blush behind lace. A hero who reads the smallest shift in a friend's posture is, in essence, reading an invisible fan. In these pages, the tradition persists not as quaintness, but as a reminder that bodies are still fluent, that eyes still converse, that desire remains more atmosphere than announcement. Some writers go further, weaving entire scenes around heritage festivals, where characters exchange ornate folding fans instead of phone numbers. In their hands, the fan becomes a prop and metaphor, a folding path between interior feeling and outward expression. Even readers who have never touched a carved sandalwood guard can feel the hush between motions, sensing how choice and consent are communicated in a space where speech may stumble. The printed word, quiet on the page, honors the quiet of nonverbal accord. In classrooms discussing modern relationships, educators borrow these same silent allegories. Is a choreography. One stands, extends a hand, waits. The other decides, accepts, redraws, or reframes. Nothing is assumed. From the fan's discreet flutter, contemporary discussions extract practical wisdom. Pause before presuming. Observe before overruling. Allow for retreat without penalty. The antique accessory, once relegated to curio cabinets, thus becomes an emblem for ethical modern intimacy. At outdoor festivals, do-it-yourself stations encourage passers-by to assemble simple paper fans, sketching symbols of personal significance across the folds, constellations, sea glass, favorite lines of poetry. When twilight settles and lanterns spark, newly crafted fans glow translucent, tiny universes, cupped in each hand. People communicate across the lawn in playful code, invented on the spot. A slow wave meaning lovely music, a pointed tip toward the sky meaning look at the first star. The original Victorian lexicon dissolves into improvisation, proving the core of the practice is not rigid rule, but shared creativity, continually refreshed like air through an open window. In quieter corners of the same gatherings, elders sit with adolescents, guiding them in soft emotions, reminding them that a brisk snap of closing ribs can feel abrupt, while a measured fold conveys calm. The lesson is as much about tempo as gesture. A conversation has rhythm, and empathy keeps time. Young faces, luminous in lamplight, absorb the knowledge, discovering that refinement is not exclusionary but expansive, making room for everyone willing to listen with their eyes. Scholars who study these revivals note that the appeal lies partly in counterbalance to the rapid pulse of modern exchange. When dialogue is reduced to quick taps of an icon, there is solace in a practice that demands duration, seconds elongated into significance, mindfulness nested inside motion. What the fan teaches is patience, and patience, in turn, teaches respect. Yet the most enduring lesson may be subtler still, the realization that silence need not equate to secrecy, nor softness to weakness. A tilt, a hush, a breath may carry firmness, even refusal, with clarity unmarred by cruelty. In that understanding, today's enthusiasts find both empowerment and peace, embodying certainty without excess sound. The fans they hold, whether heirloom or cardboard, become instruments for charting gentle but unwavering lines. And so, the montage widens. A reenactment waltz slows beneath a crystal chandelier. A museum light dims, reflecting twin crescents on an ivory guard. A novelist types the end and closes her laptop with a satisfied hush. A student slips a folded fan into a jacket pocket before stepping into evening air. A child paints one final petal, letting it dry while distant crickets begin their measured serenade. Each scene flows into the next like breathable silk, joined by an undercurrent of wordless accord. If you too have traced these folds through imagination tonight, feel how the story settles into stillness around you. Picture the last lamp extinguished in the mirrored hall, leaving only moonlight to carry the memory of slow steps. Picture chairs stacked neatly, floors swept, windows open so the breeze may wander unimpeded across polished boards. Somewhere a single forgotten fan rests on a windowsill, half open, half closed, as though dreaming its own dream of future hands that will learn its secret speech. Let the hush of that image gather softly within. Nothing clamors here. Even time moves quietly, like dust motes drifting beneath a glass dome. We have traveled from drawing rooms to digital pages, from parlor to patio, yet the essence remains a conversation too delicate for noise, too enduring for neglect. In the gentle dark, may the silent words linger, easy as breath, light as the whisper of feathers. And now, with gratitude for your tender attention, we fold the final leaf, secure the ribbon, and rest the story beside you. May its quiet meanings keep company with your quiet heart, all through the unfolding hours of night.